Okay, so due to the sort of lack of discussion lately in the group, I thought I would try something before. I'm kind of wondering whether or not it's worth uh, leaving the group a thing or not, because it's really not panning out the way I'd hoped it to at first. So here's what I wanted to try to do. I'm going to do a few videos over the next few weeks. I'm going to try anyway. That's the plan. I may decide it's not worth it doing this either, but I'm going to do a few videos on various topics. I'm going to try to keep them short and see if that pulls in any discussion or causes any um, productive conversation. So what I thought I would do with this first one is sort of come into two topics that has been brought up to me a couple of times, people not understanding what I'm referring to, or emailing me and asking me to elaborate, Facebook Messenger, things like that. For some reason, people don't want to have these conversations really where the people can see them. So I'm going to, this short video, I'm going to try to address two things. One is when I say in discussion that I refer to someone as writing their own Bible. And the other one is what I've come to call the Weinberg effect. And I'm going to describe those two things and use the Bible as an example of where I think those two things manifest in different ways. So, if I say that someone's writing their own Bible, when I say this, I'm referring to one of two cases. And the first is where someone that's reading the text says that there's something that happened or something there, something that was said that the text doesn't say was said. And during the last discussion that I had with Jacob, he referred to this, I think, as isogesis versus exogesis, sort of things you have to assume or infer that were there. And to me, that's sort of writing your own Bible. That means it's something for you personally that you feel can be assumed or implied to exist in the text. So if someone's asserting something that can't be found in the text at all, in other words. So I wanted to go, or the two reasons, I guess, that someone might do this is that, in my experience, is when they want to avoid contradiction or get out of a immoral situation that the text presents. The example that I usually use here is the genealogy given in Luke, because it doesn't agree with the genealogy given in Matthew. A lot of people just say, well, that's Mary's line, and they say that we have all these reasons to believe that that's Mary's line. And then I say, what are those reasons? And nobody really has any that are convincing at all. And I did a little blog article about why I thought those ideas weren't convincing, why simply people are just assuming that it was referring to Mary's line in order to eliminate the contradiction is really the cause of that. Then I have things like, and this was really more evident in the debate that I did, was that if people that like to use things like the genocidal claims and the murders and things like that, they say that that's all sort of metaphor. What they really meant was this. What they didn't actually mean is what it says. Things like that's people. Anytime someone says that the authors did not mean what they wrote, for me, they venture into this territory of not meaning, or of writing their own Bible, in other words. The other case that I come into this kind of often is when someone manipulates the meaning of words so much that a verse can become so muddled or so unclear that they can essentially say that it means whatever they want it to mean. Now, the example that I got hung up on when I was doing a reading of the Gospels was in Luke 14. Jesus declares, if a man hate not his family and his wife, and basically Jesus is saying, if you don't hate your family, you're not worthy of me. Now, people start going into the meanings of words and everything and saying it doesn't quite mean that, it doesn't quite mean this, and they can even go, really have to look at the book of Matthew and uh, things like that. So the first thing I usually do if they say look at the book of Matthew, and that's what it should be meaning, is when Matthew says, um, that you can't love your family more than Jesus and everything, and essentially, if someone really thinks that's what was the intention to be said in Luke, then they are saying that the verse has no business being worded the way it is. Or in Matthew, then it has really, the verse in Luke has no value. It doesn't mean anything. Then if they're saying it doesn't mean what it says at all, it means what it said in Matthew. And there's a few problems with where it's placed, in comparison to Matthew, but I don't really care about that. So if you choose to view that as a verse that Jesus is saying, you can't, you must love me more than your family. Right? I think the word used in Luke can be translated into detest on a comparative basis. So if you believe that it's saying, if Jesus is saying, you cannot love your family as much as me, or not love them or more than me, or however you choose to read it, it already really raises some issues. Morally and ethically, it starts creating its own dilemmas. But for me, it comes back to what I really viewed as one of the most important things, one of the greatest things I think Jesus ever said, was when he gave us a new commandment, from John 13, where he says, a new commandment I give unto you, that you love each other as I have loved you. And I always liked that because it gave me a reason to get around a lot of the commandments in the Old Testament. And I could say this really is the only one that means anything to me. The rest of them are nonsense, So look at that logically, that Jesus is saying, my only commandment is to love each other as I have loved you. But love me a little bit more than you love each other. That's essentially Jesus saying to, love him more than he loves you. I know it's absurd, and that's not what the text was meaning. That's just what it says. Love each other as I've loved you, but love me more. So people start looking into the meanings of all the language used there for hate and love and all this to test on a comparative basis, that essentially they can say that it means whatever they want it to mean. So that to me is a form of writing your own Bible. When you're essentially saying, the text there's literally the way it's written isn't of any use. We're going to just assume it means something else. So anyway, I don't know if that was as good a version or a good example as I should have used there, but it's just, one that I came across. So the other thing I wanted to talk about was the what I call the Weinberg effect, because it's come up really, really often. And so, as most people know, Dr. Steven Weinberg said that essentially that good people will do good things and evil people will do evil things. Or I think wicked people, I think is what he said. Wicked people will do wicked things. Good people do good things. But if you want a good person to do a wicked thing, you need religion. Now, I think it goes without saying this could include a large range of things outside of religion, any kind of indoctrination or brainwashing similar to religion that results in someone having making a moral compromise in their mind or in their view of reality. So the indoctrination is what results in these kinds of sacrifices, I guess. Where someone or some dogma convinces people to distrust their own moral judgment and reason and accept an alternative. So during my debate, there was a few different examples where this came up, and it came up when the discussion about the Midianites, because we're talking about a conquered people and women and children being taken as essentially as prisoners of war, and then they're still being killed, and so people make the moral sacrifice, saying, well, in that case it was okay. But the clearest example was because, as a lot of people know, my talking point when it comes to moral stuff in the Bible is David and David's son. So David's son, of course, as everybody knows, the idea is that he's killed by God for what David did, and he's sort of made to suffer for 7 days, and then he dies. And when I described that to my opponent in the debate, was I said, so if someone says there's any case, that an innocent child could be made to suffer and die for the sins of another person, I said, the way it's described there, and that God does it, and God himself decides to take the life of a child for the sins of another person. He said, well, I don't have a problem with that. And that's essentially what I mean when I say the Weinberg effect. If someone's religion has carried them to the point that they're forced to override and deny their own moral understanding of reality, I believe that there's an exception to the idea that an innocent child should not be made to suffer and die for the sins of another person. That means that their religion has damaged them in that way morally. It's convinced them to make that sacrifice and say, of course it's immoral, but I now have to believe that there's a case in which it's okay, that it makes perfect sense and it's not immoral. I've asked many people about this situation, and there's several different answers that I've gotten at different times. And I asked one person, I said, do you think there is any case in which a child should be made to suffer and die for the sins of another person? And I just asked him outright, do you think there's any case in which that could happen? And their reply was, no, unless it's God doing it. And this is what I mean when I say that someone's religion has forced them to say, no, there is such a case in which it's moral to make a child suffer and die for the sins of another person. It's damage done to someone by the religion, and force them to overlook their own morals, and force them to make a sacrifice of their own ethics. And that's the Weinberg effect. It's caused a morally normal person who knows, I'm sure, that it's an immoral proposition to say that a child can be made to suffer and die for the sins of another person. It's caused them to say, well, there's one way that I could imagine that would be just fine. Now, the problem is that if you follow that to its conclusion and use that understanding in other things. So as a deist, I would say if someone proposes something to me and it's clearly an immoral proposition, I'll dismiss it right away. Because the most persuasive argument that I've heard for theism, to make the step from deism to theism, is the moral argument. I say, well, it can be worded in such a way that it can be convincing right up to the point that you consider the morality of the stories of the Bible. Because once someone convinces you that your moral understanding of reality comes from God, and that God is the one in the Bible, and they're saying, that moral knowledge you have that says it's wrong to cause an innocent child to suffer and die for the sins of another person. Well, God gave you that, but he also would act in direct opposition to that understanding. That's where the argument falls, and that's where the step from deism to theism is again broken down and can't be made. So if somebody doesn't allow them to reject a claim made of God on moral grounds, here's the problem you run into. If someone murders their family, and their defense when they're arrested or charged or brought to court or whatever it is to say, well, God told me to. If you really take the position that God could cause an innocent child to suffer for the sins of another person, and you believe that if it's God doing it, then it's moral, then there's nothing you'll discount as far as God's behavior goes, because all of a sudden, just him doing it makes it moral. So there's no grounds on which a theist that maintains that position could deny the claim of the man who murdered his family. They can't look at him and say, no, you're wrong, God wouldn't do that. As a deist, I would say that he's wrong. And I'm not, of course, as some people would put, I'm not playing God to tell him he's lying. But the Bible does contain God telling people to kill their children, to kill their families, to kill their family members. All that's in there. And I can give examples of that in another video if it's needed. But someone can't logically say, can't confidently say, if they maintain that position as a theist, that the man that killed his family is wrong when he says God told him to. So that's just one of the problems you come up with. So I don't know if I've explained it good enough. I can keep going with this if somebody wants to have that discussion as far as all this stuff goes. I'm trying to rattle a few locks here. Try to get some reactions out of people. Try to get some discussion started. So that's my description of an example of the Weinberg effect. And I've given examples of people writing their own Bible, although there's many more. The minute someone starts bringing up metaphor, hyperbole, they're engaging in the act of writing their own Bible. To me, that is. But anyway, that's about as far as I wanted to go with it. So tell me what you think and discuss, please. If no discussion gets started in the next couple of weeks, I don't know, I'll probably delete the group, and thinking about looking into trying to do a kind of podcast kind of thing. I just do this video thing. Hopefully the majority of it would be discussing things with other people. But I don't know. Over this sort of medium, it gets people out of their comfort zone a little bit. Because to start with, if you're just responding to things on Facebook or over Messenger, you have the, you can Google imright.com and do all the kind of selective research that you need to do to reassure yourself and to give you some talking points. I like the idea of talking offhand with people, talking like this, or talking in person with people. It's much more real discussion. So anyway, let me know what you think. Was it a waste of time? Was it not? I don't know. We'll see. Thank you.